On February 12, 2010, a group of divers made their way to the Galapagos Islands for a diving adventure. What was supposed to be an amazing adventure turned into a tragedy when one of the divers was overpowered by strong currents and went missing. The Galapagos Islands are an archipelago of volcanic islands. The islands are located 906 kilometers west of continental Ecuador. In 1535, Fray Tomas de Berlanga, the Bishop of Panama, was the first to discover these islands while he was traveling to Peru to settle a dispute between Francisco Pizarro and Diego de Almagro. When he got back to the Spanish Empire, he told them about his new discovery and the animals that were living on the islands. This group of islands was given the name Insular de los Galapagos, meaning Islands of the Tortoises. In 1684, they made the first sketch map of the islands under the direction of pirate Ambrose Cowley. He furthermore named each island after some of his fellow pirates. Others were named after English royalty and noblemen. In 1832, the newly independent Republic of Ecuador took the islands from Spanish ownership and later renamed those islands with new Spanish names. Divers often visit the Galapagos Islands for their dive adventures. On February 11, 2010, some groups of divers aboard the Galapagos Aggressor II were going for a scuba diving adventure in the Galapagos Islands. Among them were Eloise Gale, Denise Friou, and two dive masters. Eloise Gale was a 23-year-old kindergarten teacher from Galveston, Texas, and New York. She was a lover of diving sports. The divers previously met at the baggage pickup area at the San Cristobal Island Airport before they boarded Galapagos Aggressor II. Eloise and Denise became attached almost immediately after they met because they were the only two women without an accompanist. Besides, they soon realized they were both from Texas. They were given a short briefing about their intended dive adventure. For about 20 minutes, all of them had a checkout dive to test and get familiar with their equipment, only to a depth of less than 20 feet. Many of them, Eloise included, had difficulties getting the exact weight needed for her neutral buoyancy. They were wearing heavy wetsuits in high salt water. Their checkout dive went well. The following day, February 12th, at about 6:30 a.m. after taking their breakfast, Jamie, one of the dive masters, had a meeting with all the divers. He explained to them the things they needed to know about the actual dive they were about to start, though that was a very short briefing. He used a map drawn on a whiteboard to show them their dive plan and what the dive site looks like. Jamie instructed them not to go beyond 90 feet, saying that the visibility was about 60 feet. They were also informed that there can be strong currents inside the Galapagos waters, and the current moves in different directions. Due to this strong current, they were advised not to stay in the water for more than an hour. Jamie also taught them how to surface carefully around the pangas and how to return from the water into the panga. Pangas are inflatable motorized rubber boats which are used for shore excursions and the exploration of coastlines. John and Kimberly, two other divers of the group, were astonished by the briefing. They expected it to be longer than it was because it was their first actual dive after the checkout dives they initially had the previous day. After the briefing, the divers were divided into two groups. Eloise, Kimberly, John, and four other divers were in the same group, using the same boat. Their group also included Patricio, one of the dive masters, and the panga driver. The dive master didn't check their diving equipment before they entered the boats, so Kimberly assumed that proper briefing and safety check would be done when they got inside the panga. However, nothing was done when they got into the boats. On their arrival at the dive spot, they all push off backward into the water at the same time, as instructed by Patricio, their team dive master. This was done because the panga will toss around those left in it if they don't enter the water at the same time. Kimberly and John were both conscious of their regulators, so they kept an eye on them to ensure they were on before the dive started. John immediately sought out his wife Kimberly as they entered the water, so they both gave the OK sign to each other. Dive Master Patricio and others were about 20 feet away from Kimberly and John. John never thought of Eloise the moment they all started diving. His focus was getting closer to his buddy Kimberly. During their descent, Patricio was always ahead of Kimberly and John in the depths, Also, Patricia led the team beyond the 90-foot limit that Jamie had instructed them earlier not to pass. As John and Kimberly continued following the other members of the team, they began to struggle with the current. John was almost hyperventilating, but he slowed down his descent the moment he noticed this problem. When they got to the 9-minute mark, Patricio had already gotten close to the island. So he signaled to them to hold the sloping bottom of the island firmly and move up against the current. Kimberly and John were still struggling with their stability in the water due to the strong current against them. Kimberly remembered that the last time she saw Eloise was around the 3 to 7 minute mark when Eloise was still descending into the deep water. By the time Kimberly and John were able to hold on to some rocks to get some stability on the island, they discovered that Eloise wasn't with the rest of them. But they saw Patricio and Denise talking about a missing diver. At this point, Kimberly and John had less than 2,000 psi of air in their tanks. Patricio instructed Denise to stay with the rest of the divers hanging on the rocks as he would go in search of Eloise. When Kimberly and John noticed that they were getting low on air, they signaled to the second dive master, Jamie, who asked them to start their ascent. John held Kimberly tightly so that they would not get separated from the effect of the strong current, and they both surfaced at the 30-minute mark. On getting to the surface, they thought Eloise would have been there, but they didn't find her there. They searched for her on the surface, but couldn't find her. Other divers came to the surface too, and Patricio was in a panga still searching for Eloise. John was concerned about Eloise because he knew she might have had difficulties fighting against the strong current when she got separated from them. Eloise had a diver's flag with her, so she could easily be visible at the surface. This made John and Kimberly hope that they would soon find her. They kept searching the surface for the flag from the aggressor and the pangas. At some point, Patricio and Jamie entered the water again in search of Eloise, but still couldn't find her. Some boats and the Ecuadorian Coast Guard also joined in searching for Eloise, but all to no avail. After about 4 hours of searching the surface for Eloise, the remaining divers returned to the main dive site. But Denise and Patricio returned to the water with an extra air tank in search of Eloise. They descended to the place where Denise last saw Eloise, but the current there was very strong. They allowed themselves to be driven by the current to wherever it would take them. They assumed that was what was likely to have happened to Eloise too. Upon reaching 150 feet, Denise saw Eloise from a distance. She was at 168 feet in the depths. Eloise was lying in the fetal position. Her eyes were closed, and she was calm and restful. Her mask was no longer on her, and her regulator was out of her mouth. When they brought her to the surface, they checked her air tank and found that it still had 2,000 psi of air. Her equipment was working perfectly well, but Denise wasn't sure if Eloise's 2 fins were on her. All she knew was that one of the fins was removed when they were bringing her body to the surface. When checked, Eloise's lungs didn't seem to have any water in them. What could have happened to Eloise? It was believed that Eloise died within a short time frame, around the 6 to 9 minute mark of the dive. This was based on the last time she was seen by Kimberly, and the amount of air remaining in her cylinder after her body was recovered suggested that she died earlier than they thought. It was kind of a relief for the rest of the divers that Denise was able to find her body at the bottom of the ocean, because they were haunted by the thought that Eloise might have been waiting for them to rescue her, but they couldn't. The recovery went smoothly as her body was brought back to the surface and handed over to Ecuadorian officials. Eloise will forever be missed by her loving family and friends. There are a few things that could have prevented this dive accident from occurring if they were taken into consideration. First, the divers should have been given a more detailed dive briefing on what they were likely to face while diving. Besides, one of the dive masters, Patricio, should have made the descent slow enough to prevent all the divers from spreading out as they did. They would have avoided the heavy current if they didn't go too deep. Lastly, Patricio shouldn't have went beyond the 90-foot limit, which Jamie instructed them not to go past because of the possible strong current. We would like to thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed watching, take a dive on the like and subscribe buttons and hit the bell icon so you get notified when we come back with another exciting cave diving story.